welcome back to Netball Natter. This episode we had a really exciting conversation with Christian, who is the netball lead at Champion Data. Now they've got partnerships with Australian Netball, the Silver Ferns, obviously the Diamonds. So he was able to give us a really good insight onto the statistics, the data that they collect from all of those netball games and the leagues that go on over there. It was really interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, we'd spoken to Christian a little bit kind of beforehand in the build up to kind of recording the episode, and he's given us some really interesting kind of insights and stats into how they leverage data in Australia, because obviously that is a league that's a little bit further ahead than us, obviously going professional this year. So it was really interesting to chat through this. The bit that I found probably the most interesting for me was around the super shot and how teams can start to capitalise and get benefits out of the super shot and how that has an impact on the rankings. And the other thing that I think was really interesting is that obviously one of our kind of core priorities for this kind of podcast is really around making sure that netball is like accessible and readily available for everyone and anyone that's regardless of the level or the standard that you play for, and whether you're a complete netball nerd like us or whether you're a complete novice and new to the sport. He spoke a little bit around what he created, which was the net points. So it was really interesting just to hear a little bit around how the net points have had an impact and actually how that helps to draw in a larger market when it kind of comes to netball. So yeah, shall we get straight into it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So hi Christian, thank you so much for joining me and Luce on Netball Natter. We first came across Champion Data when we were watching the Australia and the New Zealand series, and what we found really interesting was the amount of detail and stats and data that you could get off the back of this series, not only post-match but also from a commentator perspective. The amount of detail that they were able to go into was super insightful. So it led us to do a little bit of stalking, where we then found yourself and Champion Data were the organisation that sits behind all of these wonderful stats. Some of the stats we kind of noticed on there are things such as like deflections. You get into detail around shooter shot kind of percentages right the way through to where shooters are taking their shots on the court. Deflection, centre pass receives, some of the classic stuff that you expect to see. But a lot of this at the moment isn't in the UK, and we think with the professionalisation, we're hoping a lot more data and a lot more kind of resources will be pumped into the impact on games and how data plays a role in this and potentially decision making on the court as well. So we wanted to invite you on for an episode to learn a little bit more about you, a little bit more about Champion Data, and I guess the impact that you've been having on netball, and how you've affected things such as with your partnerships around the Australian Diamonds and the Silver Ferns as well. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that intro. Very long intro. And I've never been stalked by two netball natters before, so this could be a highlight of my career. But now, thanks for having me on board. Yeah, it's been a long journey being with netball and Champion Data. So we actually started capturing netball in 2008. So what are we? That's 16 years later, and we're still learning, still evolving. And data can get so much enrichment when it comes to entertainment. Now, like sport isn't just, two teams competing. It's all about entertainment. Like broadcasters are vying for the, sportainment, as they sort of call it. They want to bring more to the audience, more to make the audience feel like they're part of the production. So data is just one part of that. And thankfully, we've been able to play a pretty significant role in that development of sort of netball and the entertainment side of things. So gone are the days, and we can attribute to this, but gone are the days when data used to be considered to be quite boring. Nowadays, we try to make data as exciting as possible and come up with different angles, different analysis, so people are captivated by the numbers and what they're seeing out on the court.
And I think it's fair to say, I think we both found it really interesting, as we said, kind of looking at previous seasons of the Netball Super League versus where we're kind of hoping to get to with the professionalisation. We're intrigued to see kind of where data plays a role, as we mentioned the Australia-New Zealand series, the amount of access to data that I think makes the games more exciting when you learn that Helen Housby likes to shoot from the right-hand side of the shooting circle within this
Yeah.
kind of range. That's her sweet spot. How do then players kind of capitalize on that information? How do they potentially shift how they play as a team as well? So could you maybe dive into a little bit about your role and also a little bit around kind of what Champion Data does, if you were to give us maybe a little elevator pitch?
Sure, no problem. So what we're trying to do is provide the same level of data to every team, to every opposition, so then they can use that to support their ideas and what they're doing. So if we can free up the performance analysts to actually do more in-depth, their own team-driven sort of analysis, that puts the sport in a better position, because that team and the sport in general, they got better ways to win. So we provide a generic level, and then the performance analysts and the coaches can take that data, combine it with their own, and use it how best they see fit to ultimately win a game of netball, because that's the ultimate goal, whether you're playing, domestic competition in South Africa or an elite competition, like a Netball World Cup. Winning a game of netball is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I think even when it comes to, I guess, that the data and what you collect, one of the areas we'd spoken about kind of previously was things like the super shot and the impact that that's having. And I think it's something that is obviously very new to the UK League. We'll start to see that as the season kind of kicks off for us. But you shared with us last time a little bit of insight into the impact the super shot actually has, and also how the teams start to leverage it. So would you mind just sharing a little bit around kind of the super shot, I guess the data you start to collect around that, and actually more importantly, what that data then shows us? And I think you gave us a really good comparison around the teams at the top versus the bottom and how they use the super shot.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, the super shot well and truly has created storylines in Australia, that's for sure. It was introduced in 2020, and since then, initially the first season, I don't think the teams really knew how to use the super shot, because it was so new. It was introduced fairly late in the preseason, so teams actually didn't really have too long a time to get the head around what the super shot meant. So it's evolved slightly, the super shot, and how teams are actually using the super shot, but ultimately it's not a precursor to win. The more super shots you get, the more you win. It actually doesn't work like that. Because I'm not sure what the plan is with, the Super League introduction of the super shot, but in Australia, it's the last 5 minutes of each quarter. Is that the same?
That's going to be the same in the
Yeah. So ultimately, the way it sort of turned out, the teams that just play normal netball for 15 minutes, not just for 10 minutes, it's all about scoreboard pressure. So basically, like for example, the last 2 years and like the year just gone, the Thunderbirds, they're 2-time champs of Super Netball.
Mm-hmm.
They have the least number of super shots out of any team, and by a long way, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the grand, so they only had 35 successful super shots in 2023, whereas the Swifts, and they come first, the Swifts, who came sixth, they had 130. So they had 95 more. But the reason they got so much more is because they're at the bottom end of the table. So they're chasing the game a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Whereas your Thunderbirds, because they were leading, all they need to do is just scoreboard pressure, meaning they need the 1 point. Just keep getting the 1 points, In the grand final, they didn't attempt any 2-point super shots. So they were all 1 point attempts. Whereas the Vixens had, I think they were 8 from 9, and they lost by 2 in the end. But they didn't lose because they missed that super shot. They lost because the Thunderbirds, obviously there's other things, but in a very simplistic way, when it comes to a 2-point shot, Thunderbirds just kept that pressure on. So we've actually we looked into the numbers. So there's twice as many 2-point attempts when you're behind than it is when you're leading. We've sort of worked it out that every attempted goal, and this is sort of some, some sort of deeper analysis, every attempt at 1 point goal is worth 0.88 points, so 0.9 points for a 1 point attempt. Whereas a super shot, because there's less misses, there's only 54% success rate, it's only worth 1.1. So ultimately, a 2 point attempt is only worth 0.2 more than a 1 point attempt. So it's not very much. So if you're in the lead and you've got a 1 point chance, just go to 1 point, because it's probably going to give you more value as the game goes on, because your scoreboard's just ticking over. And I sort of try to keep it, like, I try to look at it quite simplistic. In every point that your team scores, it means the other team needs to probably score two more points to get in front of you, if you know what I mean. So but what we have noticed over the last couple of years is teams are actually, and in Australia we have rolling subs. I'm not sure, is England Super League going with rolling subs?
Yeah, I believe they are. Yeah.
So that's probably been more of an impact, because what happens now is around the 5-minute mark, teams actually are taking your traditional goal shooters out of the game and bringing the younger, more flamboyant 2 point long bomb attempters, or goal shooters. So I have noticed that's that has been a shift in the last few seasons based on when they first happened. But also, interestingly, pre-2020, the shooting average for the Super Netball was, for 1 point goals, was 86.3. But since 2020, when 2 point shots were introduced, the average for 1 point has actually gone up to 89.7. So it's actually increased the accuracy of 1 point shots since the introduction, by 3%, which is a big jump in 3 seasons. And 2 point shots is at 53.5. So, it's still healthy, but you'd rather be at the 90%.
Yeah.
But another thing with super shots, which I looked at who has the highest number of super shots in the Super Netball, and you guys will be very happy. The highest individual totals of super shots are all English roses.
Good to hear.
So,
can I guess that Helen Housby is probably at the top there?
Helen Housby features twice. So she in 2023, she shot 97 super shots from 146 attempts for a success rate of 66.4. That's the most in a season. Like, I reckon there'd be some shooters that would be happy with 66.4% in their 1 point shots.
Yeah.
So Helen Housby is number 1. Joe Harton is number 2.
Yeah.
Sasha Glasgow is number 3, and then Helen Housby last year with 73 super shots is 4th. So if you can get Housby, Harton, Glasgow back to the Super League, there's your 2 point super shot wizards.
We stole Gabby Sinclair, I think, for you. She's come back over, and I think it was very similar, as you said, in how it worked with Australia, is that the announcement was kind of made, I think, once the team selection had been done around the super shot. So I think the Birmingham Panthers are very happy to be having a Gabby there, because for the Mavs, obviously, she was that impact shooter that would come on and land those super shots. So
That's, but when you think about it, it's a tough position for these athletes. Come on with 5 minutes to go. Obviously, 5 minutes to go in each quarter. That's when the crowd's starting pressure. Oh, here you go. Get on there and start sinking 2 point long bombs.
You're not actually 10-minute warm up, but on you go. Have a go.
Correct. Yeah. But I suppose they're professional athletes, and that's what they, that's what they train to do, and that's what they want to do. They want to, sink that big 2 point long bomb with seconds to go.
Yeah, I mean, the glory, I think you must feel insane. I mean, we've seen Helen Vanderfew at the end. What do you think about the super shot? Is it a positive thing that's been brought into netball from an Australia perspective? Because obviously we were about to go through that transition, that journey ourselves. How do you feel, and from a Champion Data perspective?
Well, I probably have 2 viewpoints. I have a viewpoint as a spectator and a fan, and a viewpoint as a a worker who's on the inside of the data. So from a spectator and broadcast point of view, brilliant. It's so it enriches the entertainment value, as I mentioned earlier, so much. You'll notice the crowd goes nuts, the players go nuts, like, you know, they signal to the crowd when it goes in. And even with the close games, even with the games that aren't that close, if you sink a 2-point shot, it sort of seems to give fans that little bit extra hope that they're eating into the lead. So from that point of view, brilliant. Like, I can't fault it. I think it's brilliant. From a team point of view, as I mentioned just before, I think scoreboard pressure is probably a better option sometimes than going for a 2-point attempt. So there's another sort of viewpoint. But then again, I'm not a coach, so I don't know what their thinking is. But I can tell you from a work point of view and capturing the data, the 2-point shot has, as nice as possible way, made our job just a little bit more complex. And it's just another factor or another consideration that we have to deal with, that it's sort of hard enough as it is now. And when there's a 2-point shot going up, and, you know, because the crowd's yelling, we have to go off what the umpires call. So we've got to, you know, the umpires do a brilliant job to sort of just in general to keep a level head, but they need to be on their game. The score bench and ourselves, we have to be on our game. So it adds a complexity that adds a level of stress and a level of complexity that just, I welcome sometimes when we go back to traditional netball and I don't have to worry about a 2-point shot.
Something else you mentioned, obviously, how different teams at the bottom, teams at the top use the super shot. You also mentioned, sort of before we started recording, the timeouts and the amount that teams would use in correlation to kind of where they are on the table. And also, I think, watching as a spectator, I think a lot of those timeouts are taken sort of just before the 5 minutes or the final 5 minutes when the super shot comes in. So I guess, like, do you have any insight on that, or, you know, go into it further?
Well, I suppose with the timeout, as you said, it's sort of similar to a super shot, like in terms of if you're behind, you're likely to take a timeout more than when you're in front. So last year there was 234 timeouts called, and 55% of them were when a team was behind. 39 when they were in front, and 6 when it was equal. Because if you're got to, like, all sport now, it's all about momentum. It seems to be a shift in any sport, whether it's, you know, football, or tennis, netball, whatever, rugby league, whatever it may be. If your team has momentum, it's really hard for the opposition to claw that momentum back. So if you have the momentum, you don't want to stop play. You want to just keep going. Like you're on it. Whereas if you're the opposition, you actually want to try to stop their momentum and stop their play. So it makes sense that if you're behind and you don't have the momentum, you just want to have a little circuit breaker. So that's why the timeouts have come good. So pretty much last year, obviously a couple of slight adjustments, but the ladder, the finishing competition ladder, pretty much duplicated what the timeouts ladder looked like. So the Giants, who come 8th, they took the most number of timeouts with 38. So Firebirds come 7th. They had the second most. The Thunderbirds, as we know, finished like premiers. They had the least number of timeouts with 23. So they're having 15 less than what the Giants had throughout the season. So that's a 14-round competition. So that's 1 less timeout per game because they didn't need as many. But the anomaly was the Swifts. The Swifts came 6th, and that was pretty much decided, you know, in the last round. But they were equal with the Thunderbirds with 23. So the Swifts must view a timeout differently to the way probably some of the other teams in the bottom half of the competition view them. But yeah, timeouts pretty much replicate what's happening on the court in terms of who's winning and who's losing.
Yeah. And you obviously mentioned that 55%, did you say?
55%. Yeah.
Yeah, was when they're behind. But I guess even, some teams that are in front, but they see that momentum change, it's not necessarily that they're then becoming, behind, but they just want to sort of stop that momentum, as you
Correct.
mentioned,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. I don't know if the UK is sort of introducing timeouts. I don't think they are, but
I don't think
it's
so.
definitely sort of another thing to add to the
Yeah.
game of netball to sort of change it all up. It's really good.
It's just another tactical weapon that the coaching staff can use. If
Yeah.
they use a well-timed timeout, like it helps. So yeah. And once again, it's a type of thing when it gets introduced for the first time, it really does take a few years before
Yeah.
everyone, the coaches, the supporters, sort of get their head around the best way to use it. So I think to a degree, super netball coaches are still working out when the best time is to take those timeouts, because
Yeah.
like I have noticed some coaches sometimes, just even though the team's lost momentum, they just don't call a timeout just to probably see how their team gets themselves out of a little hole, which I've seen a couple of times successful, a couple of times probably should have taken a timeout. But yeah, it's just another attacking weapon that coaches have at their disposal.
Yeah. And sort of another thing we want to touch on, because I believe you've sort of been a massive part of this, is net points and introducing that into the game. So do you want to kind of just talk through firstly what it is, and how it affects the game, and obviously the data side of things?
Sure. Yeah. So what net points was, it's a ranking system basically. So what happened is in 2018, I used to write an article for Netball Australia to go on their website, and a stats-based article. So it sounds really exciting, and how cool am I? I'm writing a stats-based article.
Very
Most
cool.
people would
Sarah
probably
would
read it to
definitely
their
read it.
yeah.
I
Most
love
people would read it to their
data.
kids to put them to sleep. But yeah, so I used to write an article every week and used to have, from a numbers point of view. So about halfway through the season, there was actually like a split round. So, there was only 2 games on one weekend, 2 games on another. So I thought, what can I write something a bit different? So what I did, I just created a very simplistic ranking system using 9 stats, and just, a goal was worth 1, an intercept was worth, I think I had an intercept worth at about 6 at that stage, right? And created this ranking system. So, and it just went from there. So I created this ranking system. I just called it net points. So what happened is, we're looking for, then a year later, we were looking for just something that created a little bit more in-depth analysis. Like, what can we, because we're constantly trying to evolve. We can't just sit still with what we do now. We're just trying to look at new ways to look at the data, read it, and to make it more exciting for the audience, because ultimately that's what we want. So we looked at the ranking system that I did and said, how can we use this? So what we did is then I got one of our sort of data analysts, so our sort of university educated sort of data analyst, and he looked under the covers. So now we have 28 stats contributing to the net point score. So so that's sort of how it started, and it gets on the broadcast now on the website. So and we called it net point. So ultimately where we want to go is, where you really want to go with the ranking, you want to compare a goal attack with a wing defense. You just can't do it, because in terms of numbers, because completely two different positions. So ultimately you want to sort of try to equalize the numbers where you can. We're still not there yet, because it still needs to be involved, but it actually is getting better. But also what we wanted to do as well, with not just for individual players, but for teams. So if a team had the higher net point value, what's their chances of winning compared to a team that, with lower net points? So we've actually worked out, and I'll take a quick step back, is we discovered that from an individual player point of view, it just so happened that 100 seemed to be a magical number. If you can score 100 net points, you've had an elite game. So like cricket, you got the 100, you raise the bat. So that just happened by chance. That we didn't mean to do that. It just 100 became a figure. So players in our mind, if they can get to 100, but I don't know how players look at net points or whether they actually do it all, because it was sort of developed as a media type sort of analytic tool. But then also with teams, what's the magic number for teams to get to from a net points point of view? And we've worked out if you can score 526 NISA net points as a team, you win 100% of the time. So it's 36 wins and no losses when you score 526. When you score over 500, it's 98%. There's been 46 wins and only 1 loss. The Paul Swifts in 2022, I think it was, they lost the game 73-72 and scored 525.5 net points. You'd be gutted.
Yeah.
Not so much you lost the net points, but the fact that you lost. But so clearly that must have been a very high caliber game of netball where a lot of players were getting a lot of stats, a lot of scoring opportunities. So in 2024, if your team had the higher amount of net points, you won 53 games and only lost 7. So when we look at numbers like that, we feel like we must be fairly close to the mark when it comes to net points, because it does correlate with winning, which is a good thing for us. We're happy with that. But as I said, we started with 9 stats. We now have 29. So we constantly want to evolve net points. So it actually does become a clear, accurate way to sort of look at good players that are having a good game, and winning. But also it's easily digestible by the public. Like you could have your phone courtside and have our match center up, our live match center, and you can be looking at the live net points score as the game goes on. So it's an easy way without having to look at, Helen Housby, she's had 12 goals, she's had, 10 centre pass receives, 5 feeds. How does it all work? But you can sort of just look straight at net points. Oh, she's currently on 98 net points. Oh, she's having a great game, So that's sort of, yeah.
Also, it's like something that the teams can take back to their training sessions, and I guess use that data in a way to then perform on their next games. So do you have sort of any insight into how those teams use the information, or are you kind of just like, you give the data and that's it?
Well, during a game, which you guys have seen, we've got the live netball match center. Anyone can see that. It's publicly available. Broadcasters use it as their sort of stats viewer. So once again, courtside or at home, you could be looking at the match center and it's exactly the same data that commentators are looking at when they're commentating. And some teams would have, access to, all teams have access to the match center. Some would look at it. Some do their own thing. Their performance analysts have their own sort of live viewers. So that's that one. Post-match, we produce 11 reports, all on different things. We have a dedicated report to, to goal shooting. We have a dedicated report to players, game individual totals, then teams, cumulative totals, everything. So we have 11 reports that covers everything. That goes out to every team. So they would look at that. Some teams would obviously look at it differently to others. We also can provide a transactional file. So what that means is the way we capture is, center pass receive, second phase receive, feed, goal, right? That's in a very simple way. That's how we capture. So we can provide a file that's time stamped that say, right, the center pass happened at this time to this person, center pass received happened at this time to this person. So then teams can marry that up with vision. So they have their teams and players can go in and sort of say, right, I want to look at all of, Helen Housby's involvements in this game. And by marrying the stats with the vision, with some vision editing packaging that's out there, teams can do that. So they can do that using our transactional file, or they can do that using their own transactional file that the performance analysts do, or they can actually combine the two and have the best of both worlds. And it's up to the teams which which way that they go. Some use both, some use one. It's sort of, because we're not there to tell teams how to win. We're just there to provide them with a platform that what we capture for, Birmingham is exactly the same way we capture for London or whatever it may be, you know. So that's the way we operate. We want to capture a generic leveled sort of playing field and then give them to teams, and then they take that and do what they want with it.
And I do wonder how that will then come into the UK League and will we do anything like that. The thing that I love about what you were talking about in there as well was also, I think it's very easy to collect data and stats around shooters, and the fact that you're trying to level the playing field a little bit so that defence also gets the opportunity to kind of do some of those pieces as well, I think is really cool.
One of my little pet hates is when it comes time to picking a player of the match, it always used to go to the goal shooters. And I just find that I hope clearly one of you girls is a goal shooter, the way you sort of
spot shooter.
I'm a defender, so I'm backing what you're about to say.
I love a bit of glory, nothing wrong with that.
Because traditionally they were the only sort of stats you really had, not so long ago, was goals and attempts. So now, we've got intercepts, like, for example, Shamira Sterling, like, she's just revolutionised the way defenders defend. And, like, her interceptability is just next level. So one of the things we're looking to do is, because of sort of the evolution of sort of defenders or even, anyone. So now we want to look at how player or teams convert. Like, for example, how does the Thunderbirds convert Shamira Sterling's intercepts? Whilst it's fabulous to get an intercept, but if you're turning the ball straight back, is that intercept as valuable as, So we're sort of trying to look at things because, surprisingly, you'd be surprised at how often a team gets a turnover or a gain. They're slightly different, but as soon as one team gets the ball, how quickly they actually turn it over. Like, because if a player's going for this major intercept, gets it, that's going out of court, they have to throw the ball back, and the other team gets the ball back. So was it worth going for that Hailmaker intercept? Or would it have been better just to pull back slightly? Like, I don't know, but they're sort of type of things that we're starting to look at, sort of, conversion of stats, or for example, we'll use Helen Housby again. What's the conversion rate when she gets the centre pass compared to getting the second phase centre pass? Because I have heard some teams say that, like, they're quite happy for player A to get the centre pass receive because it takes them out of the second phase, or they're quite happy for him to get the second pass, or say the second phase receive, which is the second pass off the centre pass, because then that really well and truly takes them out of the third and fourth phase because they're down court, if you know what I mean. So it's now about looking at sort of how we can utilise that sort of type of data into what actually ultimately happens with the ball, whether it leads to a goal or what. But back to my original thing was, I just find it a bit an easy out when they just give goal shooters the player of the match, when, whilst they've done a great job, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of players doing plenty of heavy lifting up court to allow the goal shooter to do what the goal shooter's supposed to do.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
The other thing I really like about it is how accessible it then also makes netball as a sport, and how, as you said, it means that anyone can start to look at the net points and start to see the rankings and feel involved, and you don't have to have played at grassroots and gone all the way through and understand all the rules and understand everything. It makes it super accessible, and I think, as you said, I think it makes the sport a lot more engaging and exciting when you can attract a larger fan base that don't have to be die-hard netball fans, but maybe just enjoy the sport and like to see the rankings and the competitive side, and it brings another angle of things that you can kind of start to talk about.
Yeah, and that's why you want numbers that are easily digestible. So it's quick and short, bang, it's in your face, and you can take it, look at it and then, you move on. You don't want to, like, an audience member or a fan to sort of spend half their time watching a netball game, but half their time looking at the numbers because they don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
So that's part of our role as well. So we've sort of got two client bases in a way, like three really. We've got, clubs, which obviously use data a lot more in depth and want the enhanced analysis or the enhanced numbers, whereas the general audience doesn't need that. Then you've got the general public or the fans that easily are digestible, being it's in your face. Then obviously you've got the broadcaster as well, but they have a product that they need to deliver, because ultimately the netball broadcast is competing with the football broadcast, competing with the rugby league broadcast, the tennis broadcast, or whatever it may be. So the broadcasters are always trying to look at different angles to display their data, to talk about their data. Because ultimately, and this is one of Champion Data's sort of little taglines, is we're the story behind the game. So ultimately, that's what Champion Data is trying to do, provide information and data that sort of tells a story, and then lets the people that are using that data to, digest it and use it how they see.
Well, thank you so much, Christian, for joining us for an episode. We have loved having you on and hearing a little bit around the impact that you're having in the Australia leagues and also New Zealand leagues. And I think, it's fair to say we've loved it when we've been able to kind of leverage your data and your stats for any of the games that the Roses have played against. Thank you so much for sharing all this kind of insight. It's amazing we got to meet the NetPoint creator, which is very cool. Looking forward to all your new creations further down the line. We'll get you back on the pod to talk about those, or the AI and your latest algorithm that you've created. But thank you so much for joining us.
Problem.
We've loved having you on and learning a little bit more around the data side of things.
My pleasure. Thank you, and good luck for the season.
I really enjoyed that session with Christian, did you?
Yeah, it was really good, really interesting. And coming from a background like myself where, I'm not really that interested in data, unlike yourself, I still found it so fascinating, and obviously how Christian wants to develop the data that he's collecting and how it can have an impact on the sport. It's, really interesting.
Really interesting. I know we mentioned kind of at the start a little bit around like the net points and also the super shot, but I do think there's some really good top tips, I guess, for some of the teams that around how data is impacting how different teams. It's interesting that the Thunderbirds that won the last season in the Suncourt Super Netball, they barely used the super shot and they won. So it's interesting.
Definitely something for the UK league to sort of take into account and see what sort of strategies they use in their play. So really good insight.
And I'm intrigued to see how exciting it then starts to make the games as well, because I think as a spectator, even when I've watched the Suncourt Super Netball, it's edge of the seat when you're like, oh my god, if they land a super shot, they can literally get it in. And Gretel talking about her experiences, even Fran talking about how much she loved the super shot as well. Interesting that they all agreed that for the domestic seasons it's nice, but for international netball they don't want that to change.
Absolutely.
Which I think I do agree with. I think
I
it's
do
nice
too.
to see that, but it's nice to have something different at a domestic level.
It really is.
We've collaborated with Christian and Champion Data on creating a netball cheat sheet for you. So whether you're an attacker, defender, centre court player, there is a one-stop shop that enables you to start to track and monitor your data. So we've tried it out with some of our teams, and we've kind of found it's quite a simple way of being able to track those metrics, but it then enables you to start to set some of those targets as a team and as an individual as well. So if you're interested and you want to get access to this free cheat sheet, all you need to do is comment on our post when we land this on the Wednesday, and then we will be able to share this with you. So just comment data on the post, and then we will share by direct message access to the document. And then let us know how you get on with it, and if it's been helpful to be able to track, and are you making progress throughout your season.
Absolutely. And a lot more fun interviews, episodes to come in the future.
So stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.
See you.